Good morning, everybody. I think we're starting today with some learning, but with a bit of storytelling too. And I think knowing two of the three other panelists, that's what this morning is going to end up sounding like. And I hope you come with us on this interesting tale that faced the Comox Valley. What I'm going to do actually is give people an opportunity just to do a little bit more of an introduction of yourselves. Just in terms of, I guess, what brings you here today, if you're wanting to do that.
Well, I guess it would be the invitation brought me here.
Nice.
And it's also a chance for me to reflect on some of the experiences that I had as the mayor of City of Courtenay at that time, and to also perhaps offer some cautionary notes to anybody to be prepared. What happened in Courtenay was something that I don't think anybody had planned for, so I will offer some cautionary warnings.
Well, and I too responded to an invitation, so I'm very happy to be here. The invitation has provided an opportunity, like Greg, to do some real reflecting again on that 3-year journey from the incident in 2009 until the sentencing in December of 2011 and what's happened since. So I'll be talking about some of those things that have been going on, and I appreciate the opportunity to have that time to think about it.
And I'm Terri Wilson. I'm with the BC Hate Crime Team. You're going to learn very quickly from this that although the police come screaming in and take all the glory, we have a very small part of an investigative wedge in this whole incident that happened in Comox. The much greater part that never gets any sort of publicity is the community response to this, which was overwhelmingly, I can tell you nationally, nothing like this exists in the country. Not the Comox things, but the partnerships that you guys have developed community-wise here. One thing I will tell you about cautionary tales, I'm a policeman. I'll try not to be profane. If I am profane, I can give you my mom's number later on. Outside of that, the gloves are off.
And I do a lot of work with the arts and culture and community development sector in my community. So it's sort of odd to end up on this panel because it's not the realm with which I work. It's not my day job or anything. So it's kind of, it's cool to be asked to be here because I'm one of those people on the ground. Animateur was the word that we used. It was actually Bruce's wife who gave me that, which was I like to animate. And when things happen in our community, I like to activate and animate people and bring them together in partnership. And that's part of what I'm going to talk about today. And maybe, I don't think this crowd will need much animating, but I can animate the panel as well. So I was invited to come and talk about that grassroots community response and perhaps the unusual allies that are out there that we may forget about when we're operating within our specific nonprofit or agency that we work for, like a music festival. That's who I was working for at the time. So that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Bruce, who's going to set the lay of the land.
So it's not a very complex outline. It's the context, what happened, why was it important, and how did it work. So just a bit of a background for people who are not graced with the ability to live in the Comox Valley as part of their permanent lifestyle choice. Just where we are on Vancouver Island, 100 kilometers north of Nanaimo, 50 kilometers south of Campbell River. There are 3 municipal councils: Village of Cumberland, Town of Comox, City of Courtenay, and then all of the rural areas of the Comox Valley Regional District, which include a number of other communities that are simply not municipally organized into a council. So they have electoral representation on the regional district. It's largely a service and agricultural area based on tourism and the provision of regional government services. Historically, of course, as Meagan can tell you, Cumberland was a huge mining town very early in BC's economic development. It was a provider of coal for Dunsmuir. There's always been a commercial fishing and a lumbering economic base to the Comox Valley. That, of course, as you know, fish and trees are somewhat going the way of the dodo bird, so consequently that has declined dramatically. We have an incredibly well-developed artistic community. Huge number of people doing artistic activities of all different kinds and very actively engaged in the community in a variety of different ways. We are also home to a large Air Force base, which gives us a population of, I think, about 3,500 Air Force personnel. And up until fairly recently, we also were a site for the Canadian Coast Guard, but the government has decided to move that to Victoria for reasons which elude me. Increasingly, ever since WestJet started flying in direct from Calgary, the Comox Valley has become a retirement community for oil barons from Calgary and their friends and relations, as well as people who flee from eastern Canada because of the weather. We have nice weather, even though it rains quite a bit. And people in the BC interior who are finding it too cold up there sometimes retire to the coast as well, and they love the Comox Valley. So that is sort of in a nutshell who we are and where we are. We are a community of people who have come to the Comox Valley. In fact, I may be the only person who was raised there as an infant and a child. And even then, you know, I mean, I was only raised down at the beach resort. I wasn't really raised in the community. So in 2009, something happened in the Comox Valley that took the community by complete surprise. And although the videotape I'm going to show you carries the warning that it may disgust or offend you, I'm thinking that with this particular room, it is guaranteed to disgust and offend you. So that's the warning ahead of time. And here's what happened in July the 3rd, 2009.
Police in Courtenay have made more arrests in connection with what looks like a racially motivated attack caught on camera. We first showed you the tape, which contains some strong language, last night on CTV News at 6. Tonight, Norma Reed has details on several new developments in the investigation.
Thousands have become familiar with these disturbing images. The story is spreading fast on the internet. The now infamous YouTube video and the Keep Courtenay Safe Facebook site have received hits from all over the country. But the news hits hardest at home. It is a black eye on a beautiful city.
Well, it's an outrage. I can't believe that things like that are going on in our community. It's sickening.
I was personally repulsed by what I saw in the YouTube video. And I hope the community is too, and I hope the community is able to stand up to this sort of thing and let these people know, and people who associate with them, that it's unacceptable.
It was 3 against 1, you know, so it wasn't a fair fight.
The man at the center of it all can't believe the outpouring of support.
Everybody that posted those comments on YouTube, I can't thank you enough. You have helped me. You all have helped me so very, very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So very briefly, the context as well includes the fact that in 2009, the Comox Valley gathered together to have a development of a community protocol for responding to racism. This is the program that was funded by Embrace BC for the creation of community protocols. They've changed the program a bit now, so they don't do this particular component, but we were early enough to do that. So in 2009, in May, at the end of the month, we had a community witnessing celebration where 48 agencies, governments, local community groups, faith communities, artistic groups, service clubs, service groups, school board, educational institutions, and so on, signed on to a community protocol in terms of how we would respond to an incident of racism or hatred or homophobia that occurred in the Comox Valley. There was one notable non-signatory to that plan, and that was the city of Courtenay. For political reasons which overlay and complicate much of what's going on. The day after the protocol was signed and witnessed by all those agencies in the big house at the Comox Indian Band, there was an invitation extended to the city of Courtenay to have a second chance to sign that protocol because of some negative press that had occurred about them choosing not to sign it. And the delegation was scheduled for the 6th of July, Monday the 6th of July. However, on Friday, July the 3rd, the incident that you just saw on the videotape occurred in the parking lot behind the apartment block next to McDonald's restaurant. It was recorded from the second floor of that apartment block, and it was immediately posted to YouTube, though council itself was unaware of the incident until later on that evening. The video went viral almost instantaneously, and in many ways, it really brought the attention of the RCMP to this particular incident because for some reason or another, the RCMP watched YouTube, I guess. From the 6th to the 9th of July, press and radio TV coverage exploded. There were multiple reports on every newscast on Czech TV, Global Television, CTV, and CBC. And it was picked up on the wire service. It was July, of course, so it's a very slow month for news. But notwithstanding that, it appeared in Spanish in Buenos Aires paper, in Italian in the Rome daily paper, in English in the New Delhi Times. It appeared in Cairo, in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Johannesburg, Toronto, Halifax, Vancouver, and Moscow. And one commentator said that the London Daily Mail has given more column inches to this story than they have reported on Canada since the Riel Rebellion. The Daily Mail's not notoriously interested in the colonies. Members of the community, Meagan as an animateur, starting to act spontaneously along with a number of other very interesting people.
But let's not talk about the response yet.
Okay.
In keeping with what we're going to try and do with the flow here.
Let's
stop.
Okay,
So the context is the thing has gone viral and the nightmare begins. But we're going to pause and sort of stop and go why, a technical explanation somewhat, or why was this a hate crime? Why is this not a bunch of idiot young punks caught on camera and blown out of proportion? What's so special about this?
Well, I guess first it is a bunch of idiot young punks, but it is a hate crime. One thing I think that a lot of people don't understand, in Canada, you're not ever charged with a hate crime. It's a misnomer to believe that somebody has on their criminal record, I was convicted of a hate crime. In Canada, we actually have a better system, in my opinion, because I work in the system, but we have a better system. There's 3 sections of the criminal code to deal with hate crime. The one about this incident is a sentencing provision for hate crime. So these 3 young gentlemen, when they were arrested and charged, are not charged with a hate crime, technically. They are charged with assault or assault bodily harm. The hate crime provision of the criminal code comes into effect post-conviction. So the reason this is better than other countries, and I'll use the example of the United States, but I'm not piling on the United States. In the United States, you can be charged with a hate crime assault. Some people look at that and kind of go, well, that's much better because it's designated as a hate crime. The difficulty in that prosecution is you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it's a hate crime, and if you don't, he's acquitted on the charges. Where in Canada, you're charged with an assault, you're convicted of an assault, and we can use everything about that person's life, the offender, the victim, the incident, what the person was wearing, all that sort of stuff, to give to the judge so he can make a decision what the appropriate sentence for that person is, because it's motivated by hate or bias against a whole myriad of things, including, and Parliament was so smart to say, the last things, it says race, color, religion, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, age, gender, language. There's 11 different things. The 11th thing it says, or any other similar factor. What's significant about that is Parliament, when they enacted it in the 90s, realized that they might not have a handle on every single group in this world. So they put other similar factors, so instead of changing the legislation, anything that came forward after that could fall into that group. Very smart thing by them. I had no dealings with that whatsoever, but very smart by Parliament. In this case, these gentlemen were charged with an assault. At the end of their convictions, which is, if you ever want to read a judge's ruling on a conviction for assault, it's spectacular. After they're convicted, then the mitigating circumstances or the aggravating circumstances make it a hate crime. In this instance, because what was said to the victim, what motivated that offense to occur in some part was motivated by hatred. Therefore, the courts can then determine that it was a hate crime upon sentencing. Okay, so when you hear in the media that one of our biggest misnomers, and one of the things you're going to deal as heads of your community, is that why wasn't he charged with a hate crime? You can't be, right? Which again is a better thing. So the whole media about this, we determined that it was a hate crime. We came out to the media and says, yes, it was a hate crime. Sometimes the media gets whooped up about the fact that they're just charged with assault. Well, that's all you can be charged with. So there is a bit of a misnomer out there that we have to sort of counteract as the police to deal with that. And I use the police in a very general term that includes the judiciary, includes the Crown Council. We all work together on this. But in concert with this, I'm going to tell you right now, the police investigation was very streamlined. It was very effective. The members that did it in Comox were very, very good. They were smart enough to give us a call because we are a provincial unit, started in 1996, and we deal with hate crime across the province. Call us and we got involved. But very, very, I won't say easy investigation because it deals with YouTube. And by the way, we do not watch YouTube. We don't. My VCR still flashes 12. It's bad that I have a VCR, right? So, it's the community response that highlighted this incident to us and to the RCMP and that detachment, or those detachments, and was very effective and very, very quick. It was a very quick investigation, but without the community response, we would have had to deal with the community as well as do the investigation, which sometimes is massively overwhelming that we can't handle. Okay. That didn't answer the question, though, did it?
No, I think it did. And the role, because I'm watching, we have time, so I'm going to ask you a question before we move to Greg. It's just understanding that you can get up and say this is a hate crime, and that doesn't in any way end up negatively influencing or sabotaging the process, because you're saying they're charged with assault, but if somebody gets up and says it's a hate crime in advance of a trial, how does that work? How does the role of the Hate Crimes Committee work in that without posing a problem judicially when you say that in front of an investigation? Like, is that your role as the Hate Crimes Unit to name these things, or what is that role provincially?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So our role provincially is to identify crimes in this province that are motivated by hate. Because calling it a hate crime, because the persons are charged with assault, really doesn't influence the judiciary making their decision, because it's a sentencing provision, right? It might influence them initially, but we don't influence. We come out and say it's a hate crime because, one, when we're working with the community, they want confidence to know that we recognize it as the same thing they do. They recognized it as a hate crime instantly. We as the police should recognize the same thing or be in conversation with them on why we don't recognize the same thing. The biggest conflicts I see across this country and sometimes in this province is that the police will come out and say one thing, no, this is not a hate crime, or yes, it is a hate crime, and the community group says the opposite. And then the story becomes not the incident, but the conflict between the police and the community. In this instance, no conflict between the police and community. They came to a decision, the community came to a decision that it was a hate crime. The police came to the similar decision. There was no argument, so the story continued to be what happened to this poor black man, right? Which is all what it should be. It should never be about the problems that the police have with the community and the arguments between themselves. It takes away from the incident. So in long run, we identify it to be in support of the community group so they can invoke the resources to help the community, which in turn helps us. Because one thing that can sideline an investigation and very quickly or very slow down its investigation, got resource issues like everybody else in the world. If the police are also dealing with the community, if they're out there trying to help the community and stuff like that, it takes away from the resources we could use for the investigation. Luckily, with this protocol, or this type of protocol, those incidents don't happen. We can deal with our investigations because we are 100% confident that the issues within the community are dealt with in this protocol, and we don't really have to deal with it too much. We go and do our investigation and hopefully get a conviction at the end of the day.
So I think as we continue the story, we'll talk more, and Bruce will talk more about the role of this protocol in helping us to respond in a cohesive way. Communities are diverse nuts, and it's quite amazing, I think. And later in this agenda, I think Bruce can talk about sort of that process a little bit more. But I want to pass it over to Greg, who was mayor of this fine city when this whole thing, and still in this theme of what happened next. So not necessarily talking about how we responded, but your experience as mayor at the time in terms of media relations, and just if you could just share your story, Greg, because you were in the hot seat.
No kidding.
One of the hot seats.
I just want to put something into context, first of all. Meagan and Bruce and I have been friends for years prior to this, so that sort of helped our whole relationship. And also,
like Terri too.
The RCMP inspector at the time, Tom Gray, is also very friendly with all of us. So lucky for us, the valley, the Comox Valley, which is what we call all of the communities and the regional district, it was an easy task to come together because we knew who to pick up the phone and call. So if you're in a bigger community, that could present some problems to you. But in a small community, we're all, very close to each other. The world hearing about Courtenay through the lens. Message from all over the world, public relations disaster. Well, that's a short topic. I could speak for probably a day or two on each one, but I'm not going to. Keith Morrison does his documentaries. He's got that wonderful sort of honey voice. It all started in a sleepy little community of Courtenay. It was a Friday at a McDonald's party. He does that sort of, but that's sugarcoating what happened. From my own perspective, wasn't aware Friday. Saturday morning, I get a phone call from my son, who's a teacher here in Burnaby, and he said, "Holy F, Dad, you better watch the news." I didn't say it. I'm saving it for Terri and his mom. So I turned on the news, and of course the clip you want isn't always on, so you have to sit there and wait and wait and wait, and then finally it came on the news, and I basically said the same thing that my son had said. Holy darn. And I was stunned, absolutely stunned, and immediately started making phone calls. I had a brief conversation with Inspector Gray and had an idea that the investigation was going on. But as a municipal politician, you have no role in the judicial system. That's not your role. So you basically have to go hands off. You sort of wish them well in the investigation, and then you start thinking about what it's going to do to your community. And shortly after that, I had lots of questions. Why did this initially go, on the internet instead of being sent to the RCMP? That was a question they had as well. And then it started, and it virtually was an avalanche. First of all, requests from the media for interviews, and as with Terri and the RCMP, my reflection was on what had happened to Jay and not necessarily anything else. What happened was wrong, and there's no way you can put something like that into context. You simply have to acknowledge that what happened was wrong, and that you hoped that the perpetrators would be caught and dealt with by the judicial system. that was sort of the initial flurry, which was Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, even up into Wednesday. And I did interviews with TV stations, with radio stations, with newspapers. And then the emails started because the video went viral. And perhaps this is the first time that I was relatively new to the social media. Back in 2009, the social media wasn't quite as developed as it is today. And this thing went viral. I didn't even know what viral was, but I certainly learned. The emails started coming in from all over the world. I was planning on visiting Canada. Is it safe to come? Other more specific emails, a couple of which I referred to Inspector Tom Gray, from some people on the Lower Mainland who wanted to know if I could give them the names of the 3 young men because they wanted to come over and kick the shit out of them. And I had to write back to all of these people and ask how that was different than what had actually happened, because they were doing something out of hate themselves, even though it was not racially, it was also hate. It was perhaps the most devastating time of my life personally, because you get accused of being the mayor of a racist community. You're all racist in the Comox Valley. It was 100% defense, and it was a challenging time. And as Bruce had said, Courtenay Council dropped the ball on the protocol, and I don't know that we'll have a whole bunch of time to examine it here, but I'm certainly willing to explain that at any time if that comes up. It was, as was noted on my notes for today, it was a bit of a PR disaster for the Comox Valley initially, but that's when the community response kicked in, and that was Meagan and Bruce and everybody else, and helped take the lead on this and said, no, this is not who the Valley is. And that was a message that we wanted to get out, but again, through the context of what had happened was wrong, and that we all acknowledged that, and that it shouldn't have happened, and that we were all sorry that it had happened, but then we decided to present the community in a positive light, and how we responded to it. Because it's one thing for something to happen, it's another thing to respond to it in a proper and an appropriate manner, and I think that we did that. So, am I on time or out of time?
No, we're good. We're good. We're doing fine time-wise. I feel like I'm protracting the story, but so we're still talking as opposed to the response around what happened. So I had a different lens. I was marketing manager for a large destination music festival that was opening on July the 8th. So I was marketing the largest destination event in the Comox Valley in the week leading up to this, garnering national media. CBC was a major sponsor, CTV was a major sponsor, and I'm promoting a folk festival, a multicultural performers from around the world, love and togetherness, and I'm competing with this particular marketing message. The Comox Valley is high. You search Comox Valley on any kind of Google search, and this is what you were getting, whereas my goal was to get Music Fest to the top of this roster. So I'm in this little marketing cave while this is all going on, and horrified. But, you know, we talk about the idea that people were going, this is wrong, we have to do something, we have to respond. It wasn't, I don't want to say it wasn't that simple. Neither Bruce nor Greg think it was simple. But you come to this point where it's, well, if you're responding, are you do the self-talk. If I'm responding, am I feeding it? If we organize something, are we giving more credence to what's happened? Are we giving more value? Are we raising the profile again? People are going to go back and refer. So there's this catch-22 around community response. And I think that we actually spent, you know, while this was going on, you know, the 3 days, sort of the 2 to 3 days before we started organizing, we had a dilemma around whether, it wasn't clear, we need to organize. We weren't a bunch of, like, you know, sort of Pollyanna, let's get together and pack the picnic and do it. There was debate and dialogue within the activist community as well, saying we're not sure how to respond in this day of viral media, in this day of everything spins into something bigger. Should we be saying this isn't us, this isn't our community, and we refuse to, it's that thing about do we refuse to acknowledge or do we acknowledge? What does Jay Phillips want us to do? Do we want to continue to draw more light on this issue, or should we do something? So there was actually a lot of sort of, it was a marketing dilemma, and it was a marketing dilemma on this really fundamental sort of community level. There was a bunch of us that were in a dilemma about what to do. And again, several of the organizations that I was involved in at the time had signed onto this protocol, and I think that we'll keep touching on the protocol hopefully all the way through, because part of this, the protocol was, okay, here's this complex document, we had all these ceremonies, and we had to go sit in rooms and sign, and it was long, and it didn't really necessarily sort of going into it, we're like, of course we're going to sign the protocol against hate crime, yeah, sure, like we're busy, but of course we're going to sign on. But what did it mean? And I think it helped us as we were having this dilemma as the music community and the activist community and the local media community, that it gave us a tool to say that inaction isn't appropriate ever, and we needed to remember that, because even though we always wonder, there's always that question, doing nothing is still doing something. I guess it reminded us that idea that doing nothing became not an option because we had made a stated commitment. And I think that there were many of us who had that already in our consciousness as activists, saying, in my life as an activist in the community, if something goes wrong, I step up and say something. That's who I am. But it broadened that way of thinking to include a larger number of people that went, yeah, we've all just agreed to something. Inaction is no longer actually an option. And that was a really potent tool. So it took something that was people who were the normal rabble-rousers, like me, who go, all right, let's organize something, and sort of drew a bunch more people into that who recognized that they had a responsibility. And it was really bizarre in this short time period to go from being part of a process that was sort of intangible, a bit bureaucratic, a bit ceremonial, but we're all right, we're in, and the 98% white people in the room went down and signed the protocol in the room and went, yeah, but we didn't have this sort of, I don't know, a tangible challenge in terms of how to respond. So what happened next, sort of the two things was there was a debate. Yeah, I'll pass to you. Oh, I'll pass to you right now, and then
I just want to sort of give you not the rosy aspect of the police, because as this is going on, the community's responding, and communities saying it's a hate crime. The police are plodding along in their investigation. That's as fast as we go, we plod. But we're plodding along in this investigation. And during the course of this investigation, there is some question whether this is a consensual fight. So all of a sudden you have a YouTube video where you have 3 guys on one, and everybody in the room here goes, well, 3 on 1, that's not a consensual fight. In the legal terms, it potentially could be a consensual fight. So now the community has signed on to this protocol, and there's this raising that this is a hate crime, and the police are plodding along. Their legal strategy is about, can you imagine at the end of the day if we said, sorry, that's a consensual fight, we're not going to charge anybody? And so without this dialogue with this community group to say, here's the different aspects that could happen at the end of this investigation, we might not charge people. Like, this might, at the end of the day, not fit the legal standard to an assault, but we need you guys to be on side with us. We recognize that this is a terrible thing and stuff like that. Luckily, at the end of the day, we were able to make a determination, luckily, because it would have really blown up. As Meagan's saying, do we really keep fueling the fire? And that would have fueled the fire, holy smokes, it would have fueled the fire. But at the end of the day, the conversation with the community that this is potentially a way that the police investigation could go prepares them for action, right? We might not end up with a charge at the end of the day. In this case, we did. But without that conversation, the community and the police would have, again, the message would have been, the community and police don't see eye to eye, the police don't understand what the community is doing, and we would have been in a battle, and that would have been the story at the end of the day. And that's what we, as the police, try to avoid in all cases.
Oops, crackle. So continuing with this, I'm kind of looking at the order as we were going to talk about it, and I'm wondering, I'm dragging the response out, right? I'm trying to, but I want to go back to the protocol, and I'm just wondering if, because I've sort of referred to it there, and in terms of this community process leading up to, so without giving away what we ended up doing, Can you talk about what the role of the protocol was supposed to be in this, or the Community Justice Center and the protocol, a little bit more about that before we move into how the organizing happened?
Sure, no problem with that. The protocol is a product that comes out of the Embrace BC procedures, the 3-year process for developing it. In the 3 years that you work on the protocol, you gather together a set of participants in the process who would like to become developers of a protocol. You seek out a wide diversity of communities to participate in that process. You develop the written protocol. You go through various revisions as various groups look at it and think about it and provide their input. And after 3 years, you have a protocol, hopefully. And in most cases, I think the Embrace BC community, the communities that were involved in this process, I think most of them actually came up with a protocol in the end after those 3 years, and it was adopted and implemented.
Can we ask that question? I'm just curious, in this room, like how many people had been involved in a community protocol process or have awareness of that in their own community? That's a small number considering the number of people in the room. Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
The protocol itself is intended to identify what the participants, the signatories to the protocol, will do in the case of an incident involving hate crime, racism, homophobia, that kind of activity. So our protocol basically starts off with a set of what Greg refers to as the "we believe" clauses, which, you know, says we believe in nice things and we're nice people and we think that bad things ought to be stopped and we're going to do something about it. And then it goes on to look at a variety of ways that the community and the signatories to the protocol can respond to an incident, actions that they can undertake to try to prevent incidents, revising their policies, amending or adopting policies of their own internal policies, and collaborating together and working together on an ongoing basis to try and condition the climate of the community around these kinds of issues. So it's an educational component, it's a policy development component, it's a what can an individual citizen do component, what is the nature of the relationship with the police services and investigation and the courts and so on. And that was all contained in the 12 pages of the document. There were another 42 pages which included copies of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and so on. So it made the document look a lot more hefty. We thought that would...
Can I pause you for a sec? Now, can I ask Greg what the problem was with the protocol for the city of Courtenay and why you guys weren't a signatory?
First of all, I do want to just qualify everything in saying having a protocol does not prevent a-holes in your community. Okay, that correct?
Jerks, yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
I don't like blaming people. When you're the mayor, I had a sign on my desk that said the buck stops here, and so I take full responsibility for the city of Courtenay not signing the protocol agreement. But in doing a post-mortem on it, it arrived on my desk as 54, well actually it was a few more pages because I think there was a letter of introduction. I think we're up in the 60.
It's an epic document.
Yeah, it arrived on my desk with a thump, and the municipal clerk said, here, they want you to sign this. Well, a mayor can't really sign things without having council approval. You can, but it's just not the way you do business. So I took it to a council meeting, and it was debated. And where the process fell apart was I had a council member who was on Bruce's committee, and he had not brought this document to council at all. We weren't even aware that this was being talked about in the community at that level. So when it arrived at the council table, it arrived as a 60-plus page document, and basically just saying, here, they want you to sign this, with no delegation from Bruce, no explanation. You know, face-to-face is a lot easier to ask questions.
Assuming that the rep was communicating, probably, right?
Yeah. Assuming, yeah. And
We know what that means.
Yeah, that simply didn't happen. So And again, I'll accept responsibility for that. So we had a diverse group of counselors, and you know, again, you can't blame people. People bring their experiences to the table with them. So I had one former member of the RCMP who looked at the document and basically sneered and said, doesn't do anything. And I'm paraphrasing very politely. Former member of the Armed Forces, base commander, personal friend still, but he said, this doesn't do anything that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms doesn't do. It doesn't offer any further protection. Another counselor who basically said, I don't sign documents giving respect to people. People earn my respect. It sort of spiraled downhill out of control and crashed and burned. And despite attempts to sort of right the vessel, it basically ended up on the rocks, and the ceremony, the signing ceremony, came and went, and we weren't signatories to it. And that turned out to be another black eye for Courtenay on top of everything else. But and to date, the City of Courtenay has still not expressed any interest in signing that particular document. We did end up adopting our own sort of standards for the community, but even that was contentious. It should have been debated at the council table a lot sooner than it was, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. There's a lot of things we would all do different in hindsight. So that's sort of the brief explanation.
And just to talk about the police's response in this protocol, the protocol is not signed with the BC hate crime team, even though we're a provincial unit and we oversee hate crime investigations in the province. When you have one of these protocols, it's actually signed with the detachment that's there in that area, because we're big fans of the fact that that's the police department you're going to have to deal with, whether it's a municipal police department or an RCP detachment. We come in and help, but they're the ones that you're going to seek out. So they're the signatories on that protocol as well. It's that individual detachment. And the protocol is very easy for the police because it just says you will take reports of hate crimes. Okay? Like, we do that anyway. So it's pretty easy for the cops to sign off on it. But just to tell you, it's the local police department. You're not signing a document for E-Division RCMP. You're signing a document in partnership with your local detachments.
So it's Wednesday after the incident, and we're in this little basement office, and I am actively using social media and Facebook at that point because I'm in marketing. So, and I'd been online with Facebook since about 2007 at that, and I got a friend of mine, Shane, came into the office. So the festival I was involved with had signed the protocol, but we're like peace and love. Every opportunity we had time to do a tolerance, peace and love thing, we do it, right? That's so. But the people who were involved in our community of volunteers, a lot of them didn't know it, and I started getting phone calls from friends who were musicians, and it was actually Shane Stutchbury up at Coastal Trek who came into the office, and he was like, "We gotta do something, Meagan." And there's been many occasions where people say those words to me. Those are, and sometimes I'm like, "No, dude, I don't have to do anything. I'm busy." In this case, I was like, "Yeah, I think we do." And I think it was because, and I'll be quite honest, I was doubly motivated. I am one of those people, a go-to person to animate a group of people. I was also responsible for marketing an event, and it was not going well. And the Comox Valley was not in a positive sort of profile place. So we're like, all right, yeah, let's do an event. And this is where it shifts into that sort of community organizing front. Now, Bruce will speak to, there was concurrent conversations going on between agencies and organizations. I wasn't part of those conversations at that time. I was a person who organizes festivals and events and street parties in the Comox Valley. That's who I was. And I knew that I had a festival opening on Friday, and if we wanted to, so news, I'm going to talk about news. News is immediate, right? We have YouTube, we have news, things become old very, very soon, and you can make things happen very, very quickly if you're working with mainstream media. So it was Tuesday, and we recognized that this needed to happen before the weekend. It was Tuesday, which means it's going to happen on Thursday. So we sat in my little office in Courtenay and said, okay, we have 48 hours. We had 48 hours, and we have to do something that's big enough that it can counter the news that's happening right now, and the meme, and the term meme, a unit of social thought, social change. There's this meme about the Comox Valley out there. And honestly, the video that we've seen here, the news clip, is nothing like the 8-minute video that was actually on YouTube, because there's audio in that, and so that's a very, very whitewashed sort of version of the story. So it was pretty yucky, and people were feeling pretty yucky about it. Courtenay is a bunch of redneck, Courtenay is a bunch of redneck, racists. Courtenay is small town, backwoods, British Columbia, logging town, redneck, jerk town, right? And I moved to the Comox Valley when I was 21. I'm from Surrey, and I love the Comox Valley. So motivated by a marketing challenge, a deep, abiding love for this community I live in and the diversity of this community, and a responsibility, I guess, as an organizer and signatory. So we had 48 hours to, and our challenge, or our goal, was to, and I think I have to go on a little bit here, I think. Around the organizing part. So I guess what I'm trying to do here a little bit is say this kind of how you organize. Every community has a couple of weird people like me. Figure out who they are, and get them involved in your protocol or your signatory stuff. They're not necessarily a civil servant, or they're not necessarily someone who's involved in an agency. Everybody has their street festival or their annual peace march or the youth rally. There might be some youth event that happens, or a youth center. There are a few people that are animators. Party throwers are very, very useful in community building. We forget, and we spend a lot of time in conference rooms, or we spend time in our boardrooms, but everyone needs a couple party throwers on their team. And that's essentially what we were, is that we were people in the community. So my fortunate thing is I'm friends with Bruce, and I'm friends with Greg, and I know Tom Gray because we're negotiating our security plan for the festival with him at the same time. So, in a good place, but a party thrower. So my first sort of tip to everyone is, in your community or your circle or your board or your organization or your protocol, find some people that are highly engaged in social media and who have fun. Because one of the best ways to get people to respond is joyously. And even when something is really, really awful that has happened in your community, we know this when we come together when someone passes or someone dies. There are different ways we come together, but when we can use joy as this sort of motivating factor. So where do we start? I think we started with Greg. I remember calling Greg and asking if he'd be part of it, and you said absolutely. We immediately contacted the cultural leadership of our local First Nations. Fortunately, the cultural and band leadership are fairly closely aligned in our community now. That's not always been the case. And asked if they would be part of it. We sought out another community leader from the Wache Friendship Center, who had spent a lot of time as a mediator and moderator, and was a really strong speaker, but also a respected leader. It was Wedledi Speck, if anyone has had a chance to work with him. And then we had musicians. We went, all right, we can get musicians together. But the main thing we did is we started a Facebook group, or a Facebook event. Actually, at that time, it would have been a group, because Facebook wasn't sort of broken down a little bit more. So it was a rally against racism. Now, another thing that happened was trying to figure out whether we were having an event that was against something or for something. Another interesting sort of debate when you're organizing. Was this a rock against racism, or was this this was a rally for diversity and inclusive community? And so we kind of went back and forth, and it was called both things. We had the other thing that we did really early on, and again, if you're looking for allies, is found our local print shop, and we found what print shop would be sort of on side with us on this, because again, you don't have this huge marketing budget. So we had a local print shop that said, yeah, and they came up with the rally poster and went viral with the rally poster that ended up on all the poles downtown. So we had the Facebook. And then we did a media relations thing, which was saying that we want to counter this. And what we were saying was, we need you to know who the Comox Valley is. And this is I say it was marketing, but it wasn't marketing because we weren't pretending anything. This is the Comox Valley, folks. This is the Comox Valley. There are people in the Comox Valley who behave that way, but this is what the Comox Valley does when we come together. We sign protocols, we organize big, beautiful cultural events, we organize quickly and stealthily and smart. We can do amazing things. We're not a backwater. This is what we can do in 48 hours. But And media and media are our allies and not our enemies in this, especially community media. So I'm walking through here going, you've got a print shop, you've got party throwers, you've got First Nations and multicultural organizations. In our case, both were invited to the table. We've got a strong community leader, but not a political community leader. It's another really important thing to look for in your circles of influence is, are there community leaders that aren't politicians? Because there's a natural sort of, there can be a negative connected to a politician, but we forget how to look for leaders in our community. Well, the mayor is the leader, right? So who are the other leaders? Who are your cultural leaders? Who are your spiritual leaders within a given community? And those spiritual leaders may come from, so on the spiritual leaders front, the other thing we did is, so we found Wedletty, but then we said we need to go further with this. So who else can we find that would speak for the faith community? And there was a Reverend Maggie Enright from the local United Church, said she would be there. So now we have this First Nations leadership. We had Maggie Enright. There was a third, and I'm totally blanking on the third. I guess the third was Greg. It was Wedletty, Maggie, and Greg. I'm trying to think if there was a third spiritual leader. Anyhow, so we're pulling these people together, but again, Facebook is the tool, and everyone, and so what ended up happening, and this is my positive social media thing, and then I'll pass it back over, is a lot of people were sitting in grief. A lot of people were sitting in that, do I act or not act? Do I do or not do? And social media in this case was a brilliant tool. So social media was why this thing went so global and just, but it became this beautiful organizing tool because no matter where you were positioned from within the community, unless you had a government job and you weren't allowed to go on Facebook, but anyone else who was looking for a way to respond, that was feeling shame or embarrassment or discomfort with where we live, with this redneck city that apparently we live in, suddenly had this tool come right into their house, right into their computer around acting. So I've kind of rambled there for a minute, but the reflection part there is, who are your community allies? Like, who are your allies outside of bureaucratic or governmental structures? Those are important, and many of you come from that. And the nonprofit sector, very important, but there are these other nuts. There are the other, I don't mean crazy, I mean nuts, like nuts in this. That print shop, those cultural leaders, those party throwers, those spiritual leaders that are outside of the bureaucratic and political structures that we normally think in, because suddenly that's how you go viral. That's how you go viral, is when we get out of our circles of influence. So just kind of, that was a bit of the response. Where am I gonna, I'm gonna pass to, what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna describe this and then pass to you around Greg's involvement in the event. So we threw the event for the Thursday before this festival, and so it was a noon rally so that people could come down to our Sid Plaza, which is downtown, and there's a photo of it. And in 48 hours, well over 1,000 people arrived. Many were carrying signs that said, "Sign the protocol, Courtenay." So that was, which was cool, but Greg was there. We had kids. We started a project with yarn. You know, you try and do these little social media, we're like, can we get bracelets? Can we do that? So we tried rainbow yarn, and I was running all over looking in Walmarts and Zellers trying to find rainbow yarn. We couldn't find rainbow yarn. We got this earth tone, so that didn't really fly, but we had kids tying yarn bracelets, and we had music, and all of these people showed up, and national media showed up too. So I'm going to kind of pass back over to Bruce and talk about from the community justice perspective. So that was the party. We were just throwing a party. That's what we were doing, and people came. What were you up to, Bruce?
Well, I was... Yeah. Jay Phillips was also at the party and was invited to speak at that event. Yes. in the plaza. I was actually asleep in my hotel room in the Hyatt Regency in Vancouver when this happened, and immediately sort of went back to Courtenay to see what we might contribute. Maggie Enright, as a faith community leader, was invited to speak to talk about the positive act of coming together to say this is not acceptable to the residents of the Comox Valley. Maggie Enright is the vice president at the time of the Community Justice Center, and her congregation was one of the first of the faith communities to agree to sign on to the protocol and participate in its development as well. So the Justice Center was not organizing this. In some respects, the work that we had done on the protocol was to bring together 48 organizations to say, we will work and be partners together to do stuff when the time comes. We were not saying, and this is what you'll do. You do the mimeography, and you do the TV interviews, and you do this, and you organize the... It was set up as a group of people who would respond as they saw fit when the time came, and who would be essentially self-organizing. And that's part of the reason that having Meagan as one of the signatories to the event, to the protocol, was really good, because she's absolutely dead right. She does a dynamite job of organizing parties. And this worked out well. And she has a whole network connection and a set of social skills. She knows how to do YouTube and Facebook, and I think she probably even knows how to tweet. But she was only one of a whole bunch of people who were doing different kinds of things, which meant that, yes, at the event you saw people with signs expressing their desire, which was Courtenay signed the protocol, thinking that that was, a helpful contribution, and other people saying, we hate racism. And that was what they thought was the appropriate response. But the overall tenor of that rally on Thursday afternoon, with, as I say, a huge group of people in the plaza of the Sid Williams Theatre, the overall tenor of it was positive, upbeat, progressive, thoughtful, considerate, and none of the "we got to go out and lynch those 3 white guys" stuff, which I thought was really helpful and about which I was quite worried as we got closer to Thursday. Greg took very much a back seat position on that event, and I'm not sure, I don't think I ever asked you whether it was because you thought you were not politically in the right place at the right time or not, but from his back seat, and this is, I think, really key, I had some concerns about Courtenay not signing the protocol and some of the remarks and the publicity and so on that had been made about it. But Greg explicitly said, from my secret cache of mayor's money bucket, we will do stuff in Courtenay in the coming days and weeks and months that will try to address some of these underlying concerns and the context that's going on. And for me, that really said it all. That yes, there had been political difficulty that Greg was in. His political life was looking shorter and shorter by the day. But he had the courage to say, yes, we will do something. And as a result of that promise, there were some meetings, and we talked about different kinds of things that the city of Courtenay could do. And ultimately, that money came through. Those other events were organized later on, the following March, and we can talk about those later. But the courage that Greg exhibited at that moment spoke volumes about his integrity as a politician caught in a political crisis. And he's not the only one who was caught in a political crisis. I mean, everybody was caught in a political crisis because
I was in a marketing crisis, technically.
Sorry,
but
you were in a marketing crisis, but it was sort of political. But everybody was coming at this event in a self-organizing kind of way, and consequently had a whole different set of ways of looking at the situation. And people were acting with integrity from their points of view, and there were multiple points of view going on simultaneously.
And I just want to now pass it over to Greg. And your experience with that day, or your experience, because what we've put here is you've touched on some of this, but just lessons learned on being caught unprepared, and just what did you learn through this process as a civic politician, as a human, all of those.
My wife is a psychiatric nurse and has worked in the community for a long time, and she is my ground, and she's always been helpful in explaining to me that it's not about me, it's about her. But as we went into this whole thing, the reason that I kept in the background after the initial volleys and dealt with the media, national, local, et cetera, international, it was time for me to step back and allow the community to heal. And there's nothing worse than a politician sticking her snout in front of a camera in an inappropriate forum, and that's what I thought the party was. The party was healing for the community. So it was a good chance to stand on the sidelines to show support for the event, and in particular, support for Jay at that time.
That's who you stood with, yeah. It's
Yeah.
coming back to me now, right?
Yeah.
That you stood, you were bearing witness, you were sort of front and center, stood with Jay, but didn't actually present then.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah. Because it wasn't about me, it was about Jay, and it was about the community and how we were coming together and dealing with it. So it was interesting times. Also with Woodletty, because we had been friends for, as I keep going back to, we had all known each other and been involved in different things for
You know,
for
and
a
I
lot
think
of years.
Woodletty, just on that, and Woodletty was standing with you, and I just like that there was also people, Greg came and didn't speak, and this is like important, the politics of this is important. But Greg was hurting through this too, because he was in this role, you know, I made my disparaging politician comments, and I've been a politician too, so I don't mean to, but he was in this role, and Greg got really beat up, and Greg is a really good guy, and he was also respecting governance and speaking the will of his council, right? As opposed to being that rogue mayor who's not respecting his role as voice of the whole, right? That governing role. And Greg got really beat up. And so that day, part of the healing there too is you get these targets, is that people were, Greg was there standing with Jay, but I believe that there were people there standing with Greg and saying, we know who you are, Greg, and we understand, you know, that you chose to run for mayor, these are the risks of the job, but that we understand that you must be hurting. And I think Woodletty and other community leaders saw that with Greg, and I think that's important too when you have a target, and Greg became a target because he was the symbol of Courtenay, to express some healing and love towards those people too. Sorry, Greg, I just had to pipe in.
We did try and, well, I'll use the collective we. The city of Courtenay did adopt a statement of community values following all of this. There was some time for some healing and for some reflection, and I brought the matter back to the city of Courtenay and managed to have this statement of community values adopted. The protocol was simply a non-starter for some people still, and still is a non-starter for at least a couple of the people who are currently on council and or mayor.
Not mentioning any names.
Not mentioning my successor by name, but so there are things that I look back that I did as mayor that I'm proud of. I was born in the Comox Valley and bleed Comox Valley blood, as does Bruce, and as does Meagan, a newcomer.
18 years.
That's a newcomer. And but this is still one where I look back and I am not entirely satisfied. We could have, as a city, done better, but you've heard some of the background to it as to why it didn't happen. So, where have we gone since that time? Well, you know, I think now the media changes course, that the next shiny piece of glass has come and gone, and within, 3 weeks, the furor had died down. We get the occasional little bit now when the RCMP, when charges were actually laid, when people were arrested, when the sentencing was carried out. And another interesting phenomenon that happened during this whole thing, which sickened me again, was that these gentlemen were known in our community. Now, we use that term gentleman very loosely, don't we? Yeah. They were known in our community, and they were harassed at home, and some of them had families. And I'm a process person, you know, whether I agree with what they did or disagree or anything else, I'm always about process, because process takes us to where we want to be. Otherwise, we're one step away from a lynch mob, right? And that's not what we wanted. So there were news reports on that, as well as these people being harassed and being forced to move and their families being threatened. And later on in our wrap-up, I'll sort of again speak to the need to think ahead. This could happen to you. I didn't think it was going to happen in the city of Courtenay. I did not. I was not prepared. So when I'm speaking to you, I'm going to say be prepared, but I'll save that for summary.
Now. Go for it, because that's where we're at. If we can kind of do some wrap-up here, we have some opportunity for some questions if there are some. So why don't we just start with you, Greg?
Okay. So as I say, Saturday morning, my routine is usually to get up and walk my dog and go for a bike ride and enjoy the sleepy little town of the city of Courtenay. When I got that phone call from my son, my life suddenly changed, and my warning to people now would be to have it in the back of your mind. If you are protocol signatories, and we saw very few hands out here, if you've been involved in the process, at least you have some sort of idea as to what you might be doing. But my initial reaction was, holy, you know, and it's like life insurance, you got it, but I don't want to use it. So have something somewhere, some sort of a plan, have people that you can phone, have a support network for the people involved, have contacts with your RCMP, have some sort of a plan, because this could happen, a racial incident, it could be a homophobic incident, it could be a suicide incident, as unfortunately we're starting to witness more with teens. Have some sort of a community response to any type of an issue that could come up.
Bruce?
I guess for the Community Justice Center and for me, the opportunity to work on the protocol was an opportunity to start specifically identifying and cultivating relationships with broad sectors of the community, to start putting them in touch with each other and having conversations and beginning that relationship development so that when the time comes, they know who they can talk with and to, and who they can depend upon for support to carry on some action. The protocol also committed every signatory to an ongoing educational program, and we have been, quite frankly, we have been very fortunate in terms of our work with Embrace BC to receive a series of grants over the intervening years. We conducted 3 separate community dialogues around this incident and around the context of this incident and what it meant and what we could do to respond. We did a community dialogue on the interfaith bridging program in which the conclusion of the dialogue from these 8 or 9 faith communities who came together to discuss racism and homophobia and hate crime was that, yes, they were there at the rally, but people didn't necessarily know they were from faith communities. And they agreed in that dialogue that if this incident or a similar incident occurs again, they will actually utilize their own networks within the faith communities and appear in such events as identified faith communities, saying their faith community is standing up to say this is not what they believe. And that was very unusual because you had Mormons and Jews and Wiccans and Baha'i and Christians and Catholics and a whole host of various Buddhists and a variety of other groups, and of course the most significant sector, the group that doesn't actually align itself with any denomination of any kind whatsoever, sacred but not believers, that kind of, that group. All saying that it was important for them to, in future, stand up and be noticed that as faith community members, they would put their foot down. We've done other community dialogues in which we had the hate crimes team up and the prosecutor for this case there, and a number of First Nations and Aboriginal and other minority community members talking about their experience of day-to-day racism, day-to-day hatred they experience and they know about it, and it occurs to them all the time in stores, in communities, in hallways, in schools, and so on, talking about their experience of much lower level racism, but constant dripping of racism, and being exposed to other community organizations who were prepared to stand up with them and begin to do the work that's necessary. We have had an arts engagement project in which we were able to do interviews with over 50 youth about their experience as gay and lesbian and straight students in school, and what their experience of hatred and homophobia is, which was, that's not me.
That's not the time bell,
no. And their interview transcripts became the basis for a play which toured around Vancouver Island last spring to 3,000 students in schools, and incredibly well received. And just before closing night in the Courtenay performance, it was announced that an additional $20,000 had been granted from the community for this play to carry on this coming year, and will be going on again. So the working together across the arts communities, the faith communities, the business community, the service sector, the social service agencies, everything is part of what came out of that original protocol work, and it's left a legacy in the Comox Valley where a community response can in fact happen because Meagan knows how to tweet.
Terri, do you have something you want to say about this?
Yeah, I think for us, it's the protocol is so significant from the policing standpoint on a couple aspects. One, when my BlackBerry starts to ring, when my home phone goes off, and when I get a message all at the same time, I know it's bad. But when those things happen, like in this case and in other communities, on the way to organizing the response by the police to an investigation, we have at least one point of contact with that community. We can call out to that community saying, we're sort of on our way. The BC hate crime team, the detachment that's in that jurisdiction is investigating it, and that we can reach out to that one community. So that dialogue starts instantly. The hardest thing for us is if there's not a protocol in a community, is to, one, who do we reach out to? And two, how do we start that dialogue as soon as possible? That helps us in a couple ways. One, it helps us in a way in the fact that we know the community is being dealt with inside the community, so the resources for policing can be targeted towards the investigation. It also helps, and Greg brought it up, is the fact that during the aftermath of this incident, there are 3 gentlemen here that are now being targeted. And not knowing what the community is doing, in this instance, we knew that the community was doing and everything was about love and peace, and it wasn't turning into violent targeting these 3 guys, at least the majority of the community was that. That helped us to make certain threat assessments when it came to people that we were investigating. We were investigating these 3 guys, but we also have a responsibility to keep them safe as well. So knowing that the community is organizing peaceful demonstrations, peaceful activities, helps us make decisions about what we need to do about these other 3 guys, as well as the victim, and Jay in this case, the victim in this case, is there any sort of ongoing stuff getting directed towards him? One thing I will tell you about social media, and I don't want to be the dark cloud about social media, but from a policing standpoint, organizing on social media is great, but what you have to understand from a policing standpoint, there are many people that put comments on social media that are witnesses, and we didn't know about them beforehand. So there's lots of times we have to reach out to people and say, what did you see? Who do you know? How do you know that guy in the video? Because you got to think, this video shows up on YouTube. It's not like got arrows pointing, this is the guy's name, right? We had to identify those people. It wasn't too difficult in this instance, but there are witnesses within social media as well. So it's a bit of a two-edged sword. You're drumming up community support for the activities you're doing, but there's also people that are going to log on there that are possibly on the side of these guys or possibly witnesses that bring themselves into investigations as well, and we need to know how to handle that. And with conversation with the community groups, we can make a determination on how to handle that more appropriately than just being bull in a china shop and knocking on people's doors and being upsetting in the community as well. We try to be as least upsetting as possible.
I think that maybe what I hope I bring to this panel, or what I brought to the experience, is remembering that we are forgetting to, or maybe we just don't have as many vehicles for coming together and celebration in community. And celebration is something that we also do in response to negative, that celebration, and we think of celebration as this light party, but celebration is people coming together in community to bear witness to events, or to share an emotional response, or to show solidarity. And we're more and more fragmented, and we all know this, that we're more and more fragmented and connected perhaps only through our computers, or we drive from A to B, or we don't have our village squares or our town centers in many of our, and so as a person who's dedicated to community development, and I trivialize it by saying I'm in marketing, but it's community development, is remembering that we have legal and bureaucratic and political tools that are really important and critical, but we have organic organizing tools that we mustn't lose touch with, because this is at the essence of human beings and the respective cultures that we all come from. And when we can bring that to our work, I think that it gives me, I think that that's an important critical ingredient to all these other things. These policies and these procedures and these agencies are all very important. We live in a very complex web of a world, and we need all that. But we are also, as community and as people, losing touch with our organic organizing tools, or that ability to recognize our allies around us and figure out who we're calling and who you can call or email or drop in at out of office hours. Who are those people within our community that may not come to this forum, but that are natural allies or natural assets to community building projects? When we bear witness together, that has a lot of potency. That's what we do in faith communities, and Bruce is talking about that. People do that within their churches. Then people that are outside of and don't participate in that kind of formal spiritual work, and there's lots of us, still have a hunger or a need to do that with other people. And so maybe the protocol serves an important process function, but it also reminds us that we need to come up with ways to come together, gather, share values, bear witness, and it doesn't have to be attached to faith and religion if that isn't what's comfortable for us. Or when there's so much diversity, it's not the same spiritual anchor points. So how do we do that as community, and how do we not lose touch with that in big cities, and how do we not lose touch with that in a more and more secular, digital, computer, solo, in front of the screen kind of world, right? And so that would be, I think there's a lot of lessons in this, and one of the up lessons is, or the bright side lessons is remembering, valuing, and recommitting yourself to the role of organic organizing and grassroots community organizing. And that can involve your mayor, and that can involve your First Nations leadership, and it can involve your community justice agencies and your RCMP, and the crazy radicals, the wonderful activist radical community, and those rogue musicians. You can bring them all together into one space, and it's really potent when you do it. So I think that's our story, but we have some time for questions if people would like to do that, if anyone has any questions of any of us. Some of the things are, happy to talk about the social media stuff as well. There's a question. I understand there's a mic, too.
I think there's 2 microphones, Meagan.
And there's a mic. So there's 2 people here, a woman in the blue shirt and then just right across from her as well. And I think we have 8-10 minutes sort of for that. Is that okay at the most?
Sure.
Okay.
I had a question about whether restorative justice was an option for the perpetrators of the crime, and whether or not the hate crime component coming in at sentencing might have affected that opportunity for restorative justice?
Yes and no. Yes, restorative justice was an option. It was available, and I had conversations with the Crown Prosecutor shortly after he sort of was assigned this particular file. The chair of our protocol steering committee was also the past president of the Justice Center and a representative from the black community in the Comox Valley, and had been supporting Jay Phillips as well. The offer was there. The Crown Prosecutor was of the view that unless and until the three accused acknowledged responsibility, that he could not engage in the restorative process. And he did say that once they acknowledged responsibility or post-conviction, he would be perfectly happy to refer. We have a special roster of facilitators who are trained to do short-term transformative dialogue with incidents of racism, hate, and homophobia. However, the way things went in this particular file was the three accused, once they were charged, had three separate lawyers, each of whom advised each of their clients not to do that. And quite frankly, there are at least one of them, and perhaps two of these individuals, for whom restorative justice would not be something that they would be able to deal with. So it was offered, the opening was there, it was neither taken up by the accused, nor was it permitted by the Crown Prosecutor, and at that moment in July, where we offered it.
But the hate provisions of the code 718.2, which is the sentencing provision, doesn't, just because we call it a hate crime, doesn't limit the ability for restorative justice to be used. The good thing is it opens up the doors for anything. Whatever a judge thinks is an appropriate sentence, including conversation with victims, conversation with targeted groups, conversations that can be included throughout that. So essentially the sentencing standard goes out the window, and a judge can make a whole myriad of not recommendations, sentencing for that, which could include some sort of restorative nature to that sentence.
And then there was another question just right across there, and then two more at that table. Oh, you're going there first? Okay. That's probably it, those five then. That's as far as we'll go.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bradley Dick, and I work within the BC Public Service Agency. My family is Lekwungen, which is now known as the Victoria area. Lekwungen means a place to smoke herring. But I also have family roots within the Kwakiutl First Nation, which is now known as Fort Rupert today. And I was pleased to hear my relative's name mentioned a few times, Wedlady Speck. He's actually a very close relative to me, and also very much a mentor within my life. Nice. I really appreciate and thank you all for presenting such a sensitive topic and sharing your personal experiences as well. And so I commend you for that and say Gila Kasla, thank you. My interest is around the First Nations communities and sort of the role that was played by those community members as well. I know that three of you mentioned Wedlady throughout your discourse, and I'd be interested to hear sort of what that process looked like and just a little more on what the supports were as well. And just as an example of, how those resources can be utilized throughout BC as well.
Have to keep our answers short.
Yeah, we should keep our answers short, but the Comox band was very engaged in the protocol, so I mean, maybe just even the context of where the protocol process happened and who hosted it, and yeah.
The Comox First Nation, as well as the Wachier Friendship Center, were both signatories to the protocol. The protocol itself was signed in a public witnessing ceremony to which the entire community was invited, and it was held in the Comox First Nation Big House. And every signatory to the protocol received a limited edition print that was designed and produced by Andy Everson, a First Nations artist in the Comox First Nation, as the gift for witnessing the ceremony. There was that kind of involvement was important from the very beginning, and again, it firms up the working partnership relationship with a range of First Nations organizations and groups, so that when something happens, you can call Wedlock and say, would you do this?
Yeah. And it's not that,
it happens.
I think in our case, and I feel extremely blessed and privileged by the relationships that we have locally. It wasn't that this process was going on and, oh, we better call the First Nations. It wasn't that. When we put the rally together and we were talking about creating the circle for the rally and drawing the energy into this place that we were, it was without question that Andy and the Kamogi dancers would play that role because that's the traditional territory we were on. It's really neat to live somewhere and work with people where it isn't an afterthought or and I've lived and worked in First Nations communities. I mean, I just feel really privileged by this relationship, that it's not an afterthought, it's integral to the relationship, and it wasn't like, oh, we better have them there. It was more like they were part of the original dialogue, and it made sense that Comox would start and do the welcome and do the traditional welcome, and it was just without question. And then there was self-organizing there, so the maximum number of Kamogi dancers came to do it. And so I would say in our case, we're just really privileged with that relationship, and I don't know how you translate that to other communities other than to say that seems to be deep respect, and we continue to work hard on that respectful relationship. Respect.
Hi, good morning. I just am hearing what tremendous work and support and community effort went into the protocol, and how important this would be to bring to other communities. And I'm wondering how that might work, or is there an opportunity to share that resource, or how do we bring the good work you've done into our communities?
I'd be pleased to tell people what happens when you don't get engaged.
I believe, well, I'm not hugely technical, but the last time I looked at the Embrace BC website, all of the community protocols were there. Is that still true? Does anybody know? Has anybody looked at the site lately? I believe they're all there, and I must admit, the last time I looked was just after Langley had done theirs, and it was a bit humbling to see that Langley's protocol is virtually word for word with the change of place from the Comox Valley.
So yours is, just to move through this quickly, the work that you've done, the Community Justice Center's work is a resource you'd be happy to share with other communities? There you go. Yeah. All right.
Hi. I have a two-part question. First is, what... Oh, do you want me to stand up? You can see me. There you go. Now, racism doesn't happen overnight. What kind of circumstances do you think led to this kind of action in your community that you grew up in? And the second part is, how many people are aware of the white supremacist group Blood and Honor? Okay, so this is an actual present-day growing white supremacist group in BC, and this will be particularly for the hate crimes unit. I'm sorry, I forget your name. I'm just wondering what kind of investigations are happening, what kind of information you can share with these leaders in diversity work in BC. Thank you.
Well, we have ongoing investigations going into that group. Just to tell you, there's no connection between the gentleman that committed this offense with any organized hate group whatsoever. I can't really go into the investigations. I know that sounds like a media line, and it really is a media line. But there are investigations going. There's obviously some people, you can Google Blood and Honor and find out there's people in front of the courts right now. But in its connection with... Well, I don't know if it's growing. But what I would say is that you have to be aware, organized hate throughout the province, throughout this country, throughout the world, is responsible for a very small percentage of the race-based crime in the country. They are a problem. Race or hate-based crimes are mostly committed by individual acts of violence, of opportunistic violence. That's what we're finding. That's what the case law says. Now, I'm not saying that organized hate is not an issue. It really is an issue, and that's part of my mandate to do it. But we can't get away from the fact of only focusing on organized hate and not realizing that there are haters and racists out there that act out individually without any association to an organization. And the majority of crimes that are committed in this country are actually individuals with no association to organized hate. Sorry?
Is actively recruiting, especially in rural and poor income white places. And so I think it would be a wonderful opportunity for you to share and for us to be made aware as anti-racist workers and diversity workers what communities you've seen them growing in. And I'd just love to hear a little bit about that, if it's possible for you to share that. I'm not sure if you know that offhand either.
Yeah, I know that that group in particular is Lower Mainland based. There are groups throughout the province that are actively recruiting or actively involving themselves in the communities. What I would say to communities is, if there is any indication that there is organizations within your communities, whether it's Fort St. John, Kelowna, whatever the community you're from, then not only your local police, but let us know so we can make a determination if there's connections to other groups through other communities too, because these people don't have borders, they cross communities. So if there's any indication, whether it's social media indications, whether it's through the schools, I'd be very concentrated on your schools. Because one of their target groups is people between the ages of 15 and 18. So I'd be very in conversation with your schools to make sure that if there's any indications that organized hate is even approaching your schools, that we should know about that. And I would, it's all about, for us, it's all about the conversation. If you're in conversation with the stakeholders within your community, those problems will will be highlighted very quickly, and that's what you have. So it's all about the conversation with your community groups. If you're a silo within your community, then you're really not reaching out to other people to try to understand what their issues in the community are as well. So, but again, if there's any indication that there's organized stuff in your community, let us know right off the bat. And I would concentrate on schools or youth and stuff like that. Much like any other sort of gang mentality, it's the youth that seems to be the ones that are targeted.
So we'll do the one more question. You had a larger question about the structural roots of racism, which I think is a panel in and of itself and a sociological question that I'm not even going to begin to, like our inherently racist society and things such as that. But I hope Terri spoke to some of what you were looking for. One more.
Hi, my name is Maruna Gani, and for those of you who don't know in the room, I was the former director of Embrace BC and the multiculturalism file with the provincial government. And Bruce, it's so wonderful. I don't have a question. I want to really acknowledge for all of you coming here and telling this story. I'm trying to remember, I think it was 2006 or 2007 when I came and spoke to the community first about the critical incident response model and how to start building the partnerships and making sure the realization of who needs to be at the table and in terms of all the various stakeholder groups that needed to be there. I really commend you, Greg, for acknowledging and really talking from your authenticity and your honest reflection about where you felt was your responsibility and what you are responsible for, and how that, to me, that speaks very much in the context of power and privilege. And I think in doing anti-racism work, it's very important to keep that in mind for all of us, because we are carrying different forms of power and privilege with the work that we do. And when it comes to building relationships and seeking out who are the influencers, that power and privilege has to be kind of talked about or thought about and negotiated. So the key thing I wanted to mention was when we started out the critical incident response model, and it evolved over the years to organizing against racism and hate, and it evolved because of what we heard from the communities that we brought together. And one of the key things was sometimes it wasn't the protocol at the end as the main thing that the communities could hold up and say, this is it. It was the relationships, and that's what you talked about, Bruce. And I think in hindsight, now that I'm out of that role, I'm viewing it in a different way. I do believe it is the relationships that need to be really drawn on and brought together, and part of that relationship recognition is also looking at always being aware with an anti-racism lens of who's at the table, what's the power and privilege that's being played out, and beginning with ourselves and making sure we're always located in ourselves, and then reach out to continue those relationships. So thank you very much, and it's so wonderful for me to be here and hear where you're at with your work. Thank you so much.
That's a good end. I'll just say thank you on behalf of the panel for having us here, and thank you for the privilege of being part of your event and inviting us. Thank you.